6:30 and welcome to this evening's meeting on the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. So please remember that when you use the microphone today, you must press the button to switch it off after you've spoken, as the system only allows for one microphone to be in use at any one time. The red light on your microphone means that it's on and the camera will automatically pan towards you. If it's on green, that means somebody else hasn't turned theirs off yet. If you just leave it, when they turn theirs off, it'll go red and pan to you. Please do try to speak directly into the top of the microphone and avoid turning your head when speaking, as I'm demonstrating not particularly well at the moment. And can I please also remind all non-committee members that you will be given an opportunity to speak before the committee debate on each item. So the way each item will work is we will have the relevant officer present the item to us. We'll have a chance for the portfolio holder to then pass comment if they wish to at that point. We will then go into non-committee members to speak. Then we will go into committee member only to debate and speak, and then we'll tie it up in a resolution afterwards. If everybody could introduce yourselves the first time you speak, that would be really useful. Obviously, your name and where you represent would be lovely. We will move to item 1 on the agenda, apologies. And that will be from you, Lindsay, please.
Me.
Oh, sorry, or from Anthony.
Or from me. So we've got apologies from Andy Skeets and Councillor Sarah Williams, or Councillor Andy Skeets.
Many thanks. I believe Councillor Parker's joining us online today. Fantastic, that is great. And for all of those that aren't aware, this is Anthony Nash, who is going to be our new Senior Democratic Services Officer. And so big welcome to Anthony. Thank you for coming in tonight. Move straight to item 2, the minutes. So we've all received a copy of these minutes. Their draft has changed slightly to the final ones. The only action point on them we're still waiting for to be evidenced is the correction put out by comms, but when that is sent to us, we will send it around to everybody. Is everybody happy with the minutes or any comments? All those just indicate in favour if you're happy to accept them? Excellent, those are carried, thank you. Next is item 3, declarations of interest. No one has declared anything already. Does anybody have a declaration of interest or request for dispensation? No, excellent, that's perfect. Item 4, public participation. There have been no questions submitted. Item 5, questions from councillors. Again, no questions submitted. So we can move straight on to the meat of the agenda, and we'll take item 6, the Freedom of Information and Environmental Information requests. And presenting is James Fisher, so I'll pass to James straight away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is James Fisher. I'm the Data Protection Officer, and I work in the Assurance Service within the Information Compliance team. And we are responsible in our service for assisting the public with information rights requests, which include freedom of information and environmental information requests that are the subject of this report. And other areas we consider are also personal data breaches when they occur, law enforcement requests, so requests from other agencies like the police for information held by the council, and general data protection advice and queries. So this report concerns the council's overall performance in answering requests submitted by the public under the right of access provided by the Freedom of Information Act and the Environmental Information Regulations. And it was requested by the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee meeting on 30th of July this year to clarify performance, the council's overall performance in answering these requests and any trends and barriers experienced in meeting our statutory timescales. First of all, to explain, freedom of information and environmental information legislation covers all information that the council hold, and the rights allow any member of the public to approach the council and request information on really any topic. And at that point, the council, provided the request is sufficiently clear, the council is under a duty to confirm, firstly, whether it holds the information, and to secondly, provide a copy of that information unless a relevant exemption applies, which justifies us withholding such information that's been requested. The information compliance team's role in this process is very much to assist the customer in making sure that the request is sufficiently clear for us to identify any information that might be held. It's then to identify which council services may hold relevant information, and sometimes it will cross several areas, and to work with those services to ensure that information systems are searched in a timely manner, information is retrieved, and that we consider any applicable exemptions and issues around associated with release of the information that's being requested. So, for example, is there any personal data in the information that needs to be removed, or is something commercially sensitive, and so on. And we'll assist the business area in understanding whether there's an exemption that can that means that some of the information or all of it possibly should be withheld. So on to performance then, at paragraph 2.1 of the report. The table at that paragraph splits out the whole authority's performance in responding to requests within the statutory 20 working day timeframe we have to respond. The Information Commissioner's Office set the expectation that local authorities will respond to requests, to 90% of their requests on time. So the Police Directorate in the last, since January 24 of this year, has met that target on 3 occasions and has very narrowly missed out in other months. The lowest response rate for Police Directorate is 86%. Corporate Services present a similar picture. Their lowest since January 24 was 81%. The picture in adults and housing and children's is more mixed. The lowest response rate since January 24 for adults and housing was 55%, and for children's services, 63%. It's also worth noting that there may be greater variation in the percentages for adults and housing and children's, because they do receive a lower volume of requests, although given the type of information they hold, they tend to be complex. So to improve performance in this area, we have, as an information compliance team, undertaken various work, including to make our processes as efficient as we can. We have recently introduced automation of response reminders that go to services, meaning that officers aren't having to manually send chaser emails every time a response is coming up to its due date, and we haven't heard back from a service. To help manage performance and ensure directorates are well cited on performance, we submit a monthly report to each of the directorate management teams, which breaks down performance within their directorate and allows any overdue requests to be chased up. Now, if I could refer to the table at paragraph 2.3 of the report, this covers the key performance indicator, which looks at extremely overdue requests, and we define that as any request that is 80 days or older. And you can see from that, for April 24 to August 24, the Police Directorate have no extreme overdue requests. There's been a couple in corporate, one in children's services, and one in adults and housing, which was persistently overdue from April to August 24. Clearly, that's not a good situation. However, it is positive that it only applies to a very, very small proportion of our requests. We do process as a team 1,358 requests in 23-24. So that's an average of well over 100 a month. So where requests are going overdue, we can say that they are not becoming extremely overdue, only in very, very rare cases. The automation opportunities we've explored certainly I feel have assisted with our efficiency as a corporate team. When requests are allocated to services, there are then often further delays in retrieving information, perhaps because of staff. It could be a member of staff who has access to a particular system or understands the particular data that's been requested might be on leave or unavailable. So capacity pressures in those areas and competing demands on their resources do sometimes cause delays in services getting the information back. It's also, I should point out, we've not, unfortunately, been able to achieve all of the automation opportunities we wanted to. So, for instance, it isn't technically feasible at this time for us to automate the logging and allocation of requests to services. But we have, whilst we explore automation opportunities, we have increased our capacity within the information compliance team. So we've recently recruited an information compliance officer on a full-time contract for 1 year on a fixed-term temporary contract. So that's increasing our baseline capacity from 79.5 hours per week by an additional 37 hours, and that's we'll keep that situation under review. Other things we've done is we've made all of our requests available on Dorset Council's website. So there's a disclosure log that members of the public can view to see what information we've previously made available, and that can sometimes help avoid the need to make new information requests. And the Operational Information Governance Group is due to look at information that we proactively make available on our website, which can similarly reduce demand. Going forward, we will be discussing with adults and children what specific barriers those directorates may be facing, so that we can improve performance in those areas, as they get a relatively small proportion of the total requests. Small improvements can have a big impact on their overall compliance. So that concludes my introduction, Chair. If I can pass back for any questions.
Thank you, James. I appreciate the report. I'm looking around. I take it Councillor Ireland has decided not to attend today. I'm going to go to non-committee members first. So there's no comment from the Cabinet member. Do we have any non-committee members that would like to ask anything or probe deeper? Councillor Parry.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I'm glad you recognise the complexity in some of the cases that people are making inquiries about. But do we have a way of digging a bit deeper to understand if the delay in response is because we are waiting information from partner organisations outside of the council and able to give a fuller response to people, and if there's a particular partner for whatever who is slow in responding, what measures could possibly be taken there?
Thank you. The requests, our obligations under request only apply to information held by Dorset Council. So where we identify that relevant information is held by a partner organisation, we do make the customer aware and provide guidance on how they can request that information from the partner organisation, but it's not something we allow to hold up requests. So we don't chase the information from another organisation.
So my supplementary to that would then be that that doesn't really exonerate our own internal processes from what is a slow response. How is that matter addressed?
Where we do have slow internal responses, it will typically be a delay in us carrying out searches of the information we hold. So we are quite quick at allocating requests to the departments, although that's an area where we have been under significant pressure. But once the requests are with the departments, there then can sometimes be further delay, particularly where requests affect smaller teams who can be more affected by any kind of staff absence or anything that's ongoing in that particular service area, which is putting pressure on their resources. So getting a clear understanding of the exact reasons, for example, why requests are sometimes slow coming back from children's services or from adults in housing, isn't always easy, because there can be a number of factors, but it does tend to be delays in officers carrying out searches and retrieving information and then getting it back to the information compliance team.
Any other non-committee member wish to speak before we move to committee members? No, then we'll move to committee members. I have got Councillor Took first, and then I'll call you any signalled right at the start.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to. My name's Councillor David Took. I'm from Cranbourne and Alderholt. The report starts off paragraph 1.2 explaining why it's coming to this committee, basically because we asked to help understand the trends, barriers experienced and actions being taken to improve the situation. I'm not sure the report goes into details about actions being taken to improve. There are general trends of improvements, but I can't say anything specific. I would like to focus on two bits. Paragraph 2.2 says, work will be initiated with adults and children's directorates to better understand the challenges. It's sort of disappointing there's no information on why these challenges are not yet understood, which is surely the point of the request by Scrutiny in paragraph 1.2. It would have been good to get some reasons why, particularly adults and housing and children's, are very red and the most red in these boxes. And the other bit I just wanted to ask about was in paragraph 2.6, which talks about automation. Now, I've only spent 40 years in software development, but I just want to know, what do you mean by automation? What is it that's being automated? How will it be automated? Because to me, when you say it's not technically viable, I could probably write you something in about 2 weeks that would do it. Yeah, or if I couldn't do it, I know a mate of mine who could. So can we explain why this is so difficult? I don't understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, just so we don't bounce around everywhere, with the first point, because that was partly on my list, I also would like to understand, going on with that, why we've only just started and why we prioritised the less problematic services before the ones that have the worst general overview. So I'd like to understand why that was prioritised that way as part of it.
Okay. So on the issue of why we haven't yet done more with adults in housing and the Children's Directorate, the information compliance team, so we would be leading on that that work, and we have been under significant pressure due to a member of staff leaving our team relatively recently, and other absences. Being a small team, that has meant that our officers have been very generally very stretched, and so that more type of strategic forward-thinking work to identify these trouble areas hasn't been able to be given the time it does ultimately need for us to address them.
Sorry, just want to come in here. We're talking about a problem that was identified a year ago with the FOIs. This isn't a new change. So I understand if you've lost a member of staff recently, I understand that explains the short term, but surely this was being looked at and considered a year ago when it was coming in red.
So we certainly haven't been sitting idle for a year on the performance issues. We did. I don't have the exact date, but it was I think towards the end of last year we did start working with a team within the council, looking at our own processes and how we could automate parts of the request process so that we were getting information requests to the departments quicker, and in effect giving them longer then to interrogate their systems and get information back to us. We have improved how we work with some of the single points of contact in all the directorates, including children's and adults, so that requests are being monitored and proactively pursued, and I think that's reflected in the fact that we don't have any extreme overdue requests in children's and adults, even if we're not actually hitting that 90% target, which is of course something we want to get to. So does that answer the question somewhat?
It does, and I think we'll move on to a later point about what is an extreme request. But I think the second half is about the automation and what's the problem there.
Sure. So on the automation point, then you're right. Actually, it is. I think it is technically, from my understanding, it is technically viable that requests could be automatically logged and allocated to departments, but we've got certain constraints which have meant we can't achieve that at present. So one of those constraints was the number of information requests available on our database. We were advised by the automation experts that wasn't a sufficient data set to train a model to do that allocation accurately. The other is really about cost. Lots of things can be done, but how much is it worth spending on automating the problem? We've clearly got that balance between keeping our processes so that there's automation where it's affordable, but equally we're sort of making them simple and as effective as possible, so that staff are able to respond quickly. But I think to your point, yes, I agree. It's not a technical. Ultimately, it's probably technically achievable, but there are just challenges that we've not been able to get there.
Thank you. In terms of the automation, I don't see that as a technically difficult thing to do. In terms of the resources that you've got to operate the team and the costs of automation, I do understand that can be a problem. And it's like a great many things, it comes back to the resources made available. Do we need more people in the team? Is it a matter of resources in the team that's just holding things up and it's just a simple backlog, or is there something more complex in there?
I know it's really tempting, but we actually need to almost be rude and all look forward when we speak, because otherwise the people online only get half of it. Just so you're aware, I know it's really hard not to look at people, but yeah, no worries.
So we ultimately it is for us a people limitation in that we've just not had enough people to meet the demand with our current processes. We are a small team, and I think actually overall we work efficiently. But if we were to try to reduce staff, we would obviously need to then spend a lot of money investing in automation, and that there are clearly risks associated with things that haven't before been automated, which could be challenges or things we find don't work as well as they did before. So I think we want to, where we've got the resources to adopt these new sort of automation tools that are becoming available to us, but equally we do recognise that it is about the baseline capacity we have in our workforce.
Thank you. I'll go into Ray Bryan now.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ray Bryan. I currently am ward member for St Leonard's and St Ives, and for those that don't know where that is, the closest town to me is Ringwood, which obviously is in Hampshire, so that's where I reside and represent. I've got a few questions I want to ask. I'm going to start off with the first one, which is for the purpose of this meeting, which is open to the general public. I think they may be confused by the terms corporate and place, and I'd like to see on any future report a sort of a small 2 or 3 lines which explain what governs those areas. So if you could do that for the future, I'd be grateful. I'm now looking at 2.8 on the report, and it says, as a result, the council is subject to an action plan to improve compliance. Excuse me, Mr. Putin's trying to send a message. The 2024 return was submitted 28th of June 24, noting an improvement in training rates, but remained below the 95% compliance rate. Do I take it that the extra resources you brought in will be helping resolve that situation?
I think I know the report so we've got we submitted earlier in the year an annual information governance report on our performance, not just in under FOI and EIR, but also looking at things like data protection training. So I think the paragraph you're highlighting is in reference to the uptake of mandatory training across the local authority, which isn't at the level we want it to be yet. The role we've appointed into, I don't think increasing capacity of the information compliance team will automatically result in improved training rates. We are currently in the process of taking a paper to our senior leadership team, and that will propose ways to essentially enforce the training so that mandatory means mandatory. If staff don't complete it, for instance, they lose access to systems that they require. in effect, everyone in the council will ultimately have to complete the training, and that approach is something we're aware. There are other local authorities that follow a similar method, and also in the commercial sector, larger organisations tend to be similarly strict. So that's something. That's how we think we can tackle the mandatory training uptake.
The next section I want us to look at is 3.2. It's the final graph that's on there. My question is there a reason?
Sorry, can I just jump in a second?
Yes, sure.
I believe this is looking at the annual information governance report as opposed to the current one. And I believe that, is referenced, I guess, in this. Is that the one that's coming in November?
So I've not got that particular report in front of me, so it's difficult for me to respond to that point. But I'd be very happy to follow up in writing if you would like after this.
Yeah, that's fine. The link that you sent with the report brings out this information, which is why I was asking the questions. But I'm perfectly happy to leave it for the next meeting. And as I say, the one thing I've got out of this, it's nice to hear that resources have been brought in to improve the current situation. Hopefully, we'll hear more about that as we progress, because it is important, as Councillor Tuck has already mentioned, that we try and resolve some of the issues where we're not performing as well as we could. I'm sure there's very valid reasons, but obviously from the general public's viewpoint, they'll be looking at this and saying, well, there's a lot of red there. Thank you.
Councillor Major, you indicated you wish to speak.
Thank you. No, it's all right, Chair. I was just going to say, I think, given that he didn't have that information in front of him, he shouldn't have to answer. But that's been withdrawn anyway. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think the confusion's come as it's one of the linked appended documents as opposed to part of the actual main body of the report, if that makes sense. Any other councillors? Or otherwise, I've got a couple of points. So I will start with a couple of very quick kind of yes-no questions, if that's okay. So first question is, the current, are you fully staffed currently? Are there any empty roles?
There are vacancies, and we are very close to filling those vacancies, and there's an additional vacancy which we'll soon be going out to recruitment for.
So these vacancies are not being held in any kind of freeze or other word for it until December. They are currently being advertised for.
That's right, yes.
I can see that you have funding for one more full-time equivalent to join the team, which I assume is one that's going out to be advertised shortly. Are you confident that one more person will, I guess, double the size of the team? Because it says in paragraph 2.6, 2.7 that currently they're having double the number of caseloads than we would want to give them. So presumably they've got double the caseloads and a backlog, we'll be looking to double the size of the team. Am I correct there?
So we've had one member of the team return from long-term maternity leave, and we, in combination with this increase in 37 hours, we're confident that maybe it won't halve the caseloads, but it will bring them to a level that's approximately manageable.
Thank you. I guess in that case, what I'm kind of leading to from this is one of our main goals is to be an employer of choice. That's something we've always said has been key to us. And as I said, people have had double the caseloads than we would want to give them. And assuming we already expect quite highly of our staff, there's a lot of pressure on them. What are we doing to safeguard those employees having to work extra to catch up during this period? What's the plan going forward to make sure we are still an employer of choice?
So I line managed the team, and I of course have regular one-to-ones with them, and am aware of each individual's caseload, and so through those conversations, I'm doing my best to ensure the well-being of the team. There's also a well-being offering from our corporate HR department, which we regularly promote and remind people of. And I think the team are actually quite excited by the resources we'll soon have joining us, and we clearly going forward we strive to work together to improve our own performances, and I think it's very motivating for us to have this challenge, but to be taking clear actions to improve performance in the future, and I think that's having a really positive effect on the team's mindset.
I'm really pleased to hear that. That's very reassuring, thank you, because it's always a worry when you see inviting that people are doing twice what they're expected to. The next thing I'd like to have, and a nod or shake of the head is perfect for this one, is the 80 days for an extreme circumstance, is that nationally dictated, or is that a number that we've decided upon? Is it nationally dictated? Okay, super. In which case, I would like to suggest that I think the differentiation between one that's just missed the cutoff and one that's gone way over is a good differentiation to have. I do think 60 days over, which is 80 days, what should be 20, is 4 times as long. I would say that actually that's far too long, and actually something that's taken twice as long as it should have is actually a better metric, because if we have 20 days we should be responding in. If we're in 40 days, that's a problem. Yeah, I think 80 is taking it to a real extreme, and I'll be interested to see the graph that you presented in the bottom of 2.3 if it was done in just 40 days. Am I alone in thinking that? Does anybody else on the committee have a view on that?
I did wonder, is that doing anything? I did wonder about the 80 days and whether it was a national assumption or not. Are we in a position to set our own cut-off dates in that case? I would say that if we're already overstretched, which it appears we are, and people are doing twice as much as, or their case work is twice as heavy as it should be, then to abruptly go to a 40-day break-off is like, I think everything would be read. Now, that might be good for us, but it's not good for the morale of the people doing the work. So I would be more interested in this idea that it might have only gone one day over 80 days. So I would like to, could we have another colour? Could we have a little bit more gradation in it? So the ones that are done within 40 days, one colour. The ones that are done between 40 and 80, yes, and then over, rather than being too brutal about it at this stage.
Yeah, so fantastic. So to be clear, this wouldn't be changing any set timeline the staff are working to at all. It's purely on how it's reported to us. And the proposition there is that we would like to see, and it seems very reasonable, those completed within 20 days, those completed within 20 to 40, and those between 40 and onwards. That is it. I will also call in David Took in case he has a different opinion.
Thanks, Chair. It was just in order to, rather than be arbitrary, 20, 40, 80, 60, have we done any peer reviews? So we'll look at what councils other than us are doing, what government guidelines might be, but what would a typical well-responding council be able to respond to these questions? Is that 20 days? Is it 30 days? Is it 15? I don't know. But surely we should be looking at comparatives to say where are we maybe we're the best in the country, I don't know. Or maybe we're the worst. Again, I don't know.
That's an excellent point, Councillor Turk, because so nationally it's set that we should try to get 90% in 20 days. But actually, how do we compare? Do you happen to know how we compare on national league tables?
I don't know how we compare to the best performing councils. We can have a look at whether we can get hold of benchmarking data that could reveal a picture of that. I'm confident we're not an outlier. So when if the ICO do publicly report on organisations they've taken action against, and that reveals the performance of those organisations' own FOI requests, and we're not in. I don't feel we're close to that territory. So we're certainly. I would imagine mid-pack, but yes, benchmarking data could be insightful.
Thank you very much. Would any other committee member? Yes, go for it, Alex.
Thank you. Oh, Alex Brenton, Litchett and Upton, for those of people who don't know me. There's another section, leaving the sort of colouring and the marking. This is probably an opinion, and we possibly don't know. But is it possible that the slow reaction or slower reaction to FOIs in children's services and adults housing in particular is a slight difficulty of the officers actually being able to deal with some of the information, as in they may regard it as confidential, and we have this issue of should they be publicising confidential issues or opinions, which sometimes come into it. And I'm also interested in whether or not it says there are occasions where requests may be deemed vexatious. What sort of number? I mean, my hunch would they would mostly be within children's and adults and housing, but that's just a hunch. So it would be quite interesting to know who decides what's vexatious. Is this like repetitive complaints? Or is it particular, more confidential or sensitive information, which are regarded as like none of your business, sort of by the officers? Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I think as item point 2.2 says that you're about to start initiating the work with adults and children's, I think we'll wait and see what that work says before you comment on that part of it. I'm going to go ahead and put my guess in that I reckon the most vexations is in planning, because that's where I think vexation would be the most. However, it's a very interesting point. Do you have the stats? Would you like to come back afterwards with that information?
I don't have the stats, but I can say it's very unusual for us to refuse an FOI request on vexatious grounds. It would occasionally you get very, very persistent complaints that run over a long period of time, exhaust the complaints process, go to the ombudsman, are heard by the ombudsman, and then even once that process has finished, a requester will continue to make information requests about the same subject. In those small number of cases, that's where they might be vexatious.
So I think we can draw this together. I think there's a few things here that we're obviously we're not concerned about. We want to just keep an eye to make sure things are moving in the right direction. Can I suggest that actually going forward, I know it's something that Councillor Bartlett used to do very successfully with chairman's briefing notes, that actually we have a bit of a monthly how's the trend going for this, and then we can see if it's generally going in the right direction, then actually everything we put in place is great, not a problem. But if it's not, then maybe we can see if there's anything we do to help. I think with that, caseloads would be something that I would personally like to make sure that's going in the right direction. Councillor Major.
Either will do. Councillor Rory Major for Dorchester East. Has any deep dive been done into why those really overdue cases You know, has anything been looked into why those particular ones have gone so long? You know, is there complex issues, etc.?
I think what we're getting as a feel from this is currently there's been maybe a resourcing issue within the department. And so I think if they haven't had a chance in the year to start solving the issues with those, I don't think you've done that looking back work yet. Are you confident that once you have gone on top of what the current one's coming in, you will have a chance to do that work of looking back on it?
Yes, if that would be, if a value, we can certainly look at, take the most extreme overdue requests and conduct some sort of retrospective analysis to see if there's any commonality between them, which might explain why requests like that tend to take so long.
I think that's an excellent idea as part of the learning from it. So we're happy to kind of draw on this, that we're happy that we understand that the problems have been recognised and owned within the teams of directorates, and that there's a plan in place going forward, and that we have those kind of those monthly just numbers just to make sure it's going in the right direction, and then we would be kind of happy. Anyone, Councillor Took?
In order for the actions that they're going to take to have effect, I think there needs to be a little bit of time. These things, so if you say monthly, then it's not going to change in a month. I would suggest probably quarterly is the shortest time. That might, you can then see some effective changes. So that might, just a thought.
Absolutely. I was not expecting it to be fixed in 1 month. I meant getting those regular monthly updates so then we can see a general trend, and in 6 months and have a discussion on, has the trend generally going the right way? Is it generally not going the right way? Okay, let's maybe do a task and finish, a deep dive, whatever on it. So that's what I meant, rather than us deciding every month. It was more so we have that information so we all kept abreast of it. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, that should come from the performance dashboard somewhere anywhere as well, shouldn't it? Which we should be looking at.
So this performance dashboard has barely been populated and is very hit and miss information at the moment. So I guess until that's done, once it is updated on there regularly, then that gives us certain parts of it. But not all of this data is on there. But yes, that would be part of it.
Has it gone backwards? Because it used to be quite well populated until they changed it.
Yes, it has entirely gone backwards. It's a completely different system now, and when we looked at it, there was very little on there. In fact, one of the only things that was populated well on there were these FOIs. They were populated on there fairly. They were the only things that were on there, which is how we noticed this trend to begin with. But we'll have an update on that system separately because it still needs a lot of updating.
Can I just clarify what the request is? Because you're talking about a monthly update. Obviously, your committee meets roughly every 2 months. Are we talking about a briefing note to those formal meetings on each occasion, or are you looking for something a bit more regularly done outside of the committee? Can I just clarify that, please?
Absolutely. Apologies, Lindsay. I just, in my head, every meeting is monthly. But you're right. If we could, I'm sure the data will be split monthly as it is on the dashboard anyway. But if they were sent to us as part, ready for each meeting as part of the chairman's briefing note to go to all members beforehand. Is that okay, Lindsay? Happy with that?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the officers just for their kind of...
Yes, absolutely.
In that case, thank you so much for coming in and presenting to us. Really appreciate it. And obviously, you can stay for as much if you want to watch, or you can go and continue your evening in a much happier way. Excellent. So we will now move to the next item, which is item 7 on the agenda, Planning Enforcement Review of Previous Local Enforcement Plan. So to be very clear, we're not talking about the plan that's just been accepted by Cabinet. We are looking at previous enforcement outcomes and the data from that. That is what we're looking at today. I will go to the officer first to present, and then I'll go to questions. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask for Anna Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Anna Lee. I'm the Service Manager for Development Management and Enforcement, and part of that role includes overseeing our dedicated planning enforcement team. So this report has come at the request of the Scrutiny Committee. As already set out, it focuses on a review of performance against the previous local enforcement plan, which was in place from 2019. It also aims to set a baseline for any future review that the committee may wish to undertake. And it also covers the outcomes of the internal audit that was taken in relation to planning enforcement earlier this year. So just to start by providing a brief overview of the previous local enforcement plan, as I say, it was in place from 2019. It sets out that formal enforcement action is discretionary and must be reasonable and proportionate, and that formal action should only be taken where a breach is causing serious harm. So the focus of that plan was on resolving breaches through negotiation and using formal action effectively as a last resort. The plan goes on to set out that the council will prioritise cases and assess the risks involved, but it was light on detail in terms of how that prioritisation would be undertaken. And there was a specific target in the plan that related to the council normally aiming to provide a response to a written notification of an alleged breach within 28 working days. However, there was no monitoring in place of that specific target, but obviously we can report on general performance against the plan, and I'll come to that later in terms of the performance statistics. And before I do so, I wanted to briefly mention the audit, as that was specifically requested as part of the committee's request for this report. The audit was undertaken earlier this year. It was a really useful process, and through that audit, a number of actions were identified to help us improve the effectiveness and efficiency of our enforcement service. Quite a few of those actions have already been undertaken. They're set out in detail in the report. I'll just highlight there are some ongoing actions. Two of those relate to effectively the technology around our systems, and particularly allowing automatic population of our software system when we receive an enforcement inquiry, and also ensuring that our enforcement register is available online. They are both ongoing tasks, and we're aiming to complete those, but I think it's by the end of April 2025. There's also an ongoing action to review all of our enforcement templates that we use in relation to serving notices and so on, and we're aiming to complete that by the end of this year. And the action that I did want to highlight in particular is there's an action to explore ways to address legacy enforcement cases. The audit specifically focuses on legacy cases which were opened before Dorset Council formed. However, as a team, we think that that review and that work to address legacy and backlog cases needs to be wider and needs to look at older cases that have been received since Dorset Council formed as well. And again, I'll come back to that a bit later. Just turning to the performance statistics. So firstly, in terms of reviewing performance against that previous plan, there are two areas I'd highlight in the report, which are presented, I think, from paragraph 4.6 onwards. There are a number of pie charts which show the reasons for, well, it shows the overall cases that have been resolved by the planning enforcement team in the 3 years shown, and the reasons that those cases were closed. I'd highlight in particular, there are quite a large number of cases that are closed because we identify, having investigated, that there is actually no breach of planning control. And the other aspect is that a large number of cases are effectively resolved through negotiation, either negotiating to ensure that any breach ceases or is amended such that it's no longer a breach, or through requesting a retrospective planning application which is subsequently granted. So I think broadly those pie charts show that the reasons for resolution accord with the aim of that previous enforcement plan in terms of resolving first through negotiation. Moving on to notices served, there's a detail in the report, or a summary, sorry, in the report of the various formal notices that have been served since 2019. A few points I would mention on that. You'll see that in terms of the numbers of notices served, quite a few of the notices refer to requests for information. So the largest number of notices served are planning contravention notices. Those are about where we've identified a potential breach and we're requesting information, and there's a requirement to provide that information in order to inform our investigation. Other notices that relate to requesting information include Section 16 notices and also Section 330 notices as well. We served 52 enforcement notices, so they would be requiring a breach to cease, or And they cover a range of different issues, for example, unauthorised residential developments, unauthorised changes of use of land, unauthorised business uses, a broad range of different breaches. Just sort of moving down in terms of measures which are used less frequently, we do have the ability to take actions through the courts. That would be in relation to if we were seeking to prosecute, for example, if an enforcement notice has not been complied with, or if we're seeking to require a cease of a breach through an injunction, which means that any person who continued that breach would then be in contempt of court. Those are used more rarely, but I did want to highlight, I think there's an error in the graph because we have since 2021, there have been 2 successful prosecutions and also one injunction that we sought that wasn't actually granted, whereas there's only 1 case showing there. So we have a bit of an issue around some of our data entry, which we can resolve after this meeting. But those kind of court actions are really, as I say, they're sort of the last resort and in the rarer cases. And we would always consider the public interest test and evidential tests in relation to those. Moving sort of more to the request to set a baseline for any future review, the report also sets out a range of indicators which in many cases we've introduced since the audit. So one of the actions arising from the audit was for us to look at our performance indicators and broaden those. So we have recently started monitoring the percentage of cases which are registered within 5 working days of receipt, and that graph is in the report showing performance against that. We also monitor cases opened and resolved each month, and part of the aim of that is to ensure we are keeping on top of the workload and not building up further backlog, although we do have a backlog issue, as I mentioned. And those charts, again, are presented in the report. And we have introduced an indicator around the percentage of cases resolved within 8 weeks, which again is presented. The other indicator I wanted to mention was the total enforcement open caseload. Again, in terms of setting the baseline, at the moment we have it's around 900 open planning enforcement cases. Just to give a bit more detail to that, around 400 of those cases are 2 years old or older, and that's kind of the focus of our work when I talked about the legacy and backlog review, which is the next action we're looking to take forward. Of those 400, there are 170 cases which are older than 4 years old, and so there is a risk of immunity within those cases. Now, that won't apply to every case. It's very specific to the details of the case. Immunity periods for planning enforcement vary according to the nature of the breach, and there are some breaches which don't have an immunity period, but nonetheless, we do have an element of risk around those cases which are more than 4 years old. And then we have around 80 cases which predate Dorset Council and so are older again. And as I say, that's the next focus is to try and reduce that backlog. I was also asked to cover in the report the budget for the planning enforcement service. I have focused on the planning enforcement team that sits within my area of planning. I would just add that the planning enforcement function does require specialist input from teams across the council, particularly, for example, conservation and tree teams as well that feed into that work. But in terms of the planning enforcement team, we have a budget for just under 12 FTE posts. Actual people in posts at the moment are slightly less than that. I think it's about 11.5, and that's because we just have a few posts where people are working slightly reduced hours. Separate to that, we have 2 full-time equivalent monitoring and enforcement officers within the minerals and waste team. Also, in regard to resourcing, we do have a budget for legal costs. I've already mentioned there are cases where we need to progress to court, and so legal advice is needed in those situations. And we also seek legal advice in relation to appeals because planning enforcement notices have rights of appeal associated with them. So that budget that we have for legal costs is around 40,000 for this financial year. I think in terms of summary, yeah, as I say, the report's trying to set out the position as it has been since 2019 up to 2024, but also provide that baseline, given we've just introduced new performance indicators for a future review. And our main focus in terms of further actions we want to undertake following the audit is the kind of backlog cases. In terms of how we're going to address that, we are firstly seeking to use the resource we already have, and we're going to start implementing a series of team focus days to look at the oldest cases first and seek to review those. But it's fair to say that task will take time, clearly, and we need to keep it under monitoring and review in terms of the progress against that. And that was the end of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I really appreciate that. Councillor Bartlett, thank you for coming tonight. Would you like to say anything at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Councillor Shane Bartlett, Cabinet Member for Planning and Emergency Planning and the Ward Member for Wimble Minster. Just to give some background information, more for the benefit of the public probably listening in. So the effective enforcement is essentially maintaining a public confidence in the planning system. The Council has a dedicated planning enforcement team who work to resolve over 500 alleged breaches of planning control each year. In line with the previous local enforcement plan, a large proportion of breaches have been resolved through negotiation, for example, by inviting respective planning applications or advising that a particular use or development needs to be amended. In some cases, where there is a serious harm breach cannot be resolved through negotiation, the team have taken formal action, such as serving enforcement notices, and have undertaken prosecution where the evidential and public interest tests are met. The recent internal audit was a useful exercise in identifying areas for improvement to ensure the Council's enforcement service is efficient and effective as possible. Many of the actions identified in the audit have either already been implemented or are in progress. However, there is an outstanding audit action to review cases which were opened before Dorset Council formed, and this action will be broadened to cover older cases which are more than 2 years old. The current overall caseload for the team is too high, and it is important that these backlog cases are reviewed to reduce any risk of immunity and to move to a position where the overall caseload is more manageable. This action to address the backlog of older cases will be the next area of focus for the team, with the aim of making a meaningful progress over the next year. Addressing the backlog will continue to investigate new alleged breaches will be challenging and inevitably will involve an element of prioritisation. We will need to monitor progress and to keep this under review as work progresses to address the backlog. The Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the contents of this report and endorse the ongoing work to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our enforcement service. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Shane. I will open up to non-committee members. Oh, no, okay. Any other non-committee member wish to speak? Councillor Parry.
Thank you very much. I note on 5.3 of the report that planning enforcement budget also includes a legal expenses budget of 40,000 for the financial year 24-25. Anybody who's engaged corporate lawyers required for some of this work will know that doesn't sound like a big budget to me. Is that one of the factors that perhaps puts us off going down the route of litigation? And if, when we do go down the route of litigation, what, if any, of that amount of money is recoverable if we're successful?
Thank you. So, yes, we have to be mindful of, clearly, of using public funds appropriately. So we would always consider whether it's in the public interest to seek legal advice. But the budget situation is not currently constraining us in that. So at this point in time, that 40,000, we are within budget. We're projecting to be within budget at the end of this financial year. What I would say, and as members will be aware, one significant enforcement appeal inquiry would take that budget and more. And in that circumstance, it would be a case of us making that case that we would need that additional money and securing it. So I think the answer to the question is it's not constraining us at the moment, but we are obviously mindful of ensuring we're making best use of council money.
Sorry, can I just clarify a point? I want to quite understand that answer, sorry. If one serious contravention came in, that would be more than that budget. So the budget is set to not be able to deal with one. Is that what I heard?
Sorry, I should clarify. If we had a planning enforcement notice which was served and then there was an appeal, and if that appeal went to an inquiry, that would have a significant impact on that budget. But that doesn't happen every year. And if it did happen, then it wouldn't be the case that we wouldn't defend that appeal inquiry. We would find the resources to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Page, do you want to come back again? So any other non-committee member wish to speak? No. Committee members? Who would like to start this off? Councillor Took.
Thank you. I welcome this report, and I think it identified a number of issues. I mean, we've got the various findings and the results in section 3. And I think it is important, I think, that we look at enforcement and try and get some confidence back in the general public. As chair of Eastern Area Planning, I constantly get people saying there's no point to enforcement because all you do is go along with whatever they've done. Now, that's not true. I know that's not true, but it's a perception. I think we need to address that. Having said that, I'm not entirely sure of the best way to do that, but that might be something that needs to be spoken about. Because if we simply do it by negotiation and then give planning permission, somebody comes to this, they complain that they got permission to do that, but they've built the roof 3 feet higher, and now I can't see. And the whole point of the roof line being 3 feet lower was not to disturb my view. So that's an enforcement complaint. That's a typical sort of thing. Now, I understand it's going to be difficult to say, I'm sorry, you've built your house, you've put your roof on, take it off. But if you don't do that, if there isn't some sort of perception that people can see that there's been a response, that there's been an effective response to reporting it to enforcement, then the whole planning system starts to be dragged into disrespect. And I think we need to be very careful of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. I think it actually sort of blends slightly into the changing in modern society where people want to see the outcome of someone's wrongdoing and the punishment, so to speak. It's not necessarily punishment, but the rectification of the works. I know the police have done a big thing recently on social media where they sing about when they've caught somebody doing something incorrect, and they publish that online. And actually, there might be a piece of comms work to do about that when there has been a planning contravention and we have then made it be reversed, because it does, otherwise it leads into the perception of what's even the point of planning, because they'll just let you get away with it afterwards. While other people's thinking, I do want to jump in on a couple of points that I had. And item 4.9, you say there's about 900 current cases pending. And currently we seem to solve 50 to 100 more a year than come in, which would mean that there's quite a number of years before we would cover that backlog. We've asked to endorse the changes going forward. I can't see any information in here about how you're actually going to do that, because with 11 full-time equivalents or 12 full-time equivalents that are leaving you 50 ahead, how are you going to clear that 900 backlog?
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, I think the full 900 isn't the backlog, so we would want to see that caseload. Ideally, we'd want that caseload to be about 500, so it's the 400 excess cases, and absolutely, it will be challenging to reduce that down. We're at the outset of that work. It's the last part of the audit really that we're looking at in detail in terms of working out how to do that. But we are going to introduce focus days with the team where they were focused solely on those backlog cases. And if each enforcement officer that we have could close just between 1 and 2 additional enforcement cases or resolve between 1 and 2 additional enforcement cases per month, then we could see significant inroads into that backlog towards the end of next year. So that's kind of the plan at the moment, but it's something we need to keep under review. And I absolutely think it is going to be challenging.
Thank you. So I'm aware we're heading towards a budget setting process. I guess I'm really, there's a few red flags that are coming up for me, and when I see a red flag, I have to comment on it. So initially, when we were discussing at a webinar the new enforcement plan, and it was stated there that we did not look at the data for our what we currently do to inform that plan, that worried me as one. And secondly, if we have a new plan coming in, which is a whole new policy that the officers are going to have to then stick to and judge everything against, We're now asking them to learn a new plan and at the same time do more work than they're currently doing to try to recover it. That, to me, this seems like we're putting roadblocks in the way of reducing this. I need some kind of tangible information or examples of how you're going to be reducing this backlog when you're already putting kind of barriers in to make them have to do more work for each individual case.
Yeah, thank you. I think to some extent we need to start the work and then perhaps report back in terms of how that's going once we've started to get into the detail of the cases. But in terms of the new local enforcement plan, it sets much more clarity around prioritisation, which I think may assist. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to make it harder. I don't know, Darren, did you have any comment on that?
No, certainly. The new local enforcement plan, it sets out more, if you've read the new local enforcement plan, on the bottom page of that, there's a flow chart that we've explained how an investigation will take place and how the process involved. We had a team meeting this morning. We did discuss how we are going to progress expediency, and that's where we need to focus, I think, on making the expediency calls a lot earlier on in the investigation, not let things rumble on and gather momentum, as it were. So it's looking at the cases as a statistical way in the fact that we are looking to progress the case a lot, making a decision whether we are taking it further to enforcement action or not. So the new local enforcement plan is there as a skeleton structure for us to work through rather than a roadblock to try and stop us from progressing. If that makes more sense for you there.
Thank you. And I guess it does. I guess for me, it was the idea of currently the plan is very, very loose. And it's very much down to each individual officer's decision and how they view that plan. Because it doesn't cover it. It's not going to do a lot of detail. Whereas now we have a new plan that does have that framework set out well, and it has a level of detail that is required. I envision that any change from your choice to follow this plan will have a little bit of slowdown initially. And hopefully in the long term it will be expedient. Do we have you put a request in at all for any short-term help to come and try to just clear the backlog and blast through part of the backlog for this next year's budget? I'm just thinking, because otherwise, if this problem is still persisting in a year's time, we've already missed the boat for adding any more staff.
So yes, informally, I have asked for additional budget to help clear that backlog. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. That gives me a lot of reassurance. That's great. Thank you, Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. Following on from my previous remarks, I was also going to ask. One of the planks that we use is to ask them if they can apply for planning permission. So that you've done this, can you apply for planning? If they've had planning permission, but they have not stuck by it, are we asking them to apply for a new permission? And if so, can we guarantee that will go to committee? Because I think it should.
Councillor Took, you've hit onto one of my favourite points for the whole of planning enforcement, is the dreaded non-material amendment, which has very, very little definition in law and is very much down to each individual planning authority's definition of it. And so actually I think it would be interesting if we did know what our definition is, because I know that raising roof height, as a good example following off from earlier, doesn't count as a material change under our kind of current setup. So actually, yeah, if you could talk on that, that'd be very interesting.
And yet we spend endless time in committee saying, should that roof be 2 foot lower or 3 foot lower? And if that is just ignored and the planning permission is ignored, that, to my mind, that needs to come back to committee and to say, okay, will the committee accept this change or not? But that's my personal view.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps if I deal first with that question around planning permission is granted, something different is built, and then do we then invite an application? That's going to depend, on the specific circumstances of that case. So if that came to the enforcement team's attention, the enforcement officer would be visiting the site and then seeking planning advice if needed to assess whether any change would be likely to be approved through a planning application, and if so, an application may be invited. And none of that stops the right of an applicant anyway to submit a retrospective planning application. Turning to the question of whether or not those items can automatically go to committee, as you know, we have the scheme of delegation process for committee referrals. That's the process that all of our applications follow. So any retrospective application would follow that same process. And it would be whether those triggers are met in terms of a ward member or town or parish council having a view that's contrary to the officer view, and then the potential consultation with the chair and the vice chair. So that usual process would be followed for a retrospective planning application.
I think what Councillor Took was saying, because obviously that policy and those triggers is something that we've written ourselves as Dorset Council. And I think what the suggestion there is to consider that when something's coming back for an amendment, that should actually, rather than it being, because that normally when an amendment comes in, that's not sent to the local councillors or the parish council to look at unless it's considered a material amendment. And so I think there is we're looking for another check and balance, that if there's an amendment going through, that is then sent to the local members, and I assume the parish or town as appropriate, to then just have an input on is that amendment material or not, because our definition isn't, watertight, shall we say? Because actually what is material in one area wouldn't be in another, if that makes sense, because of the characteristics and local design codes of the area.
Yeah, so absolutely, and whether or not a change is considered a non-material amendment would be dependent on the specifics of that case and that context. In terms of my own view is that we shouldn't have a separate process for retrospective applications. I think that would bring difficulties. So I think those applications do need to follow the same process as all of our applications. I think if there are concerns around the approach taken to non-material amendments, and we do publish the reports for those applications, and we're quite happy to discuss any concerns about specific cases as and when. But I personally wouldn't. I think that it would be difficult to separate out applications which have come through a retrospective application route, and I think there may be some challenges with that. Thank you.
I think what we're looking for is a happy medium between the two. Rather than new policy, I think that is not necessary. However, when an amendment is put in for a planning amendment, if that is sent to the local members and the town councils, and FYI, they could then respond if it is of a level that they feel. So I think because that doesn't require a new policy or procedure, and we send the other ones out anyway.
So that's more a sort of notification, so for awareness, which we do with some other types of application. Yeah, I can take that away and look into that, and thank you.
I don't want to get hung up on retrospective applications. They cover a multitude of sins. What I'm talking about is specifically where planning permission has been granted and standard text on the planning permission is development will be done in accordance with the submitted plans and diagrams and within 3 years, and there's all this standard stuff that goes with all of them. So they've had application approved, they've built it, but they have not built it according to the plans. They've made the roof 3 feet higher or whatever it might be. And my point is, in that case, the idea that they can then say, oh, it's a non-material amendment, it is frankly silly, because they've had a planning application that's been considered carefully. There's been conditions put upon it. They submitted the plans and they haven't stuck to them. And I think at the very least, that should come back to a committee to look at, rather than perhaps a planning officer who may possibly be rather reluctant to say, no, you've got to remove the roof, because that will cost the applicant a fortune. it will not do us any good. They may appeal, it may cost money, but at the end of the day, either the planning regulations and the planning committees and planning decisions mean something, or they don't. And I think they should.
Rather than going into the specifics here, I think what we're talking about is when it comes to, and I'm going to go with this non-material amendment, because an actual amendment that has to be put in, will then come and be notified, and that covers that side. It's this non-material amendment, and I think actually, rather than just looking at that here, I think maybe we can come back another time to look at the definitions of the non-material amendment, which I think is something that would have fed in quite heavily into the local enforcement plan had it gone through those kind of processes of scrutiny before it was made. So maybe when that comes, we could look at the non-material amendment definitions then. Would you be comfortable with that, Councillor Took? Excellent. Anybody else have any comments on this? Absolutely, go for it, Neil.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Isink, Egerton Ward. I just had a kind of a general query, really, that I'd just like clarification on in relation to legislation. And so in relation to planning enforcement being a discretionary service, I fully appreciate that's the case. But I just wanted to clarify in relation to the Town and Country Planning Act. As I understand it, that does place a duty on councils in terms of investigating breaches, not necessarily following up, but the duty is there to investigate. So that was kind of one side, that's great. And the other bit was in relation to the National Planning Policy Framework. And just wanting to clarify, really, I think Councillor Bartlett already alluded to this, that within the MPPF, it does actually state that there is a responsibility on councils to maintain, public confidence within the planning system, and planning enforcement and enforcing planning enforcement forms a key part of that. So, okay, great, I've got both of those correct. So in relation to that, then, I guess I'd had a follow-on question around the graphs and around something that was stated in the audit report. So in the audit report, there is a sentence around cases not being escalated for investigation, and states that they're not sufficiently monitored, not sufficiently stored and monitored to provide insight for capacity management. I think you remember the bit. So I was just wanting to clarify, really, where it says cases not escalated, what does that mean? Do they fall within the bar charts that we've been shown? They don't. So there's an initial stage where cases come into an email box, presumably, and then those are reviewed, and on that basis, a decision is taken to investigate or not. So I suppose I have an initial concern around how that process works. I fully appreciate that some of them may well be vexatious. Some of them probably people not understanding that what issues are planning enforcement and what aren't. But I guess I'm just trying to get comfortable if they're kind of effectively consigned to not being investigated, whether that actually does fit with the requirements in relation to the Town and Country Planning Act. And I suppose it makes sense that some aren't if they're vexatious, but I just wondered if there was a review process in relation to that to mitigate some falling through the gaps in terms of actually being planning enforcement issues that then don't get followed up at all.
So thank you. Perhaps if I provide a high-level response, and I'll ask Darren to talk a bit more detail about how that process is undertaken. But yes, when we receive enforcement inquiries, there's an initial look to see, is it actually identifying a breach of planning control? And if it's clear there is no breach, then a case wouldn't be opened because we've already established there's no breach of planning control. Similarly, some inquiries we receive actually relate to matters covered by other areas of the council. In those cases, we would forward that inquiry onto the other area of the council, but we wouldn't open an enforcement case. So that the audit did identify that we're not recording that aspect of the work, and we want to move to that position where we are, but it is the aim is to automate the inquiry form coming into our software, which will then enable that monitoring. So that's that. But I don't know, Darren, did you have anything to add?
No, thank you. As you've just alluded to, the enforcement cases, and originally we got 3 area planning teams Those area planning teams are now, as a result of the audit, are now working together from a single inbox rather than 3 individual inboxes. That's all governed through the online reporting form on our website, so everything then gets pushed through to one single inbox. Those 3 teams now, as a result of the audit, are now doing joint allocation meetings every Tuesday and Thursday mornings, where they will go through the inbox. Now, the data that's part of the audit finding there suggests that the elements that are not being recorded into MasterGov, which is our recording system. So if I could just throw something out there that we have, say, for example, we have 3,000 enforcement complaints come in. 1,000 of those are not recorded in any way, but work is undertaken on that, which is officer time that's taken up to review the incoming inbox, the complaint that's been recorded. And majority of these cases, sometimes we've had some really ridiculous ones, if I'm honest, batteries running out in the remote control, silly things like that. But these things come through as a complaint to the enforcement team. We then go through all individual cases, every single one of them, to decide whether or not it is a planning breach, or is it something we can, like Anna's just said, pass on to another member of the team, whether it's environmental health or trading standards or someone else, or is it a breach of planning control? Then we look at the priority side of things, and that's when it's registered. And that's when we have a record on MasterGov. So the hidden work that we've undertaken has been missed, which is what the audit suggests there. We're trying to, at the moment, we're trying to input all complaints in manually, which is taking, as you can imagine, quite a long time. The ultimate aim is to get that as an automated system, which I think is part of the timescale for April, or was it for the automation of the system, April next year. So hopefully that will capture every single complaint that comes in, whether it be a breach of plan control or not, automate it into our system as a MasterGov inquiry, then we review it on a Tuesday and Thursday in our allocation meetings as one single team, and then we will decide whether or not it is a breach of plan control. Then if it is a breach of plan control, we have to look at the harm. Is it harmful? And that's a whole new story there that I could go on for hours about. But hopefully that will answer your question.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I guess it does kind of, to a certain extent, clarify what I was getting at. I think my concern is that the cases that are not being included at all, you know, and in this I have to acknowledge what an amazing job that planning enforcement do, actually, because planning is an incredibly complex process, an overlay of multiple levels of legislation. And I suppose therein lies my concern in terms of that review of what's coming into the mailbox. Because when you look at the interplay of the national landscape, conservation areas, general permitted development order, and how all those layer on top of each other, and I suppose I'm just wanting to get comfort over the fact that the emails that are coming in are getting a sufficient review to ensure that things aren't falling through the gaps. My concern, I suppose, is that things like engineering works, for instance, minor engineering works, that are actually, fall under engineering works from a planning development perspective, may just be consigned to the do not investigate box on the basis that it's just a bit of a tweak of a road level or it's a bit of a change to a track, when actually, albeit that there may be no need to kind of pursue enforcement action, it does still form part of a planning breach.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that, along with that. I think one of the concerns that I'm drawing out from this for myself as well is what are the checks and balances in place when we are just, before it's being even logged, saying, no, that doesn't count, we're not looking into that one. What's the checks and balance to make sure nothing falls through at that point? Because obviously that could have quite big outcomes when we're not then following two legislations we have to.
Thank you. Yes, as I said, the case allocation meetings is attended by the 3 senior enforcement officers from the areas, as well as their assistants who undertake the administration of that task. Now, as I say, all the items that come within the inbox are looked at and investigated. We then determine whether or not it is a breach of plan control or not. The ones that are not a breach of plan control are recorded on our system manually currently. that's put aside because that's nothing to do with planning. It's not part of the planning regime. Anything that is a potential planning enforcement breach is then looked into in further detail. And then we'll start to look into the back history. Have we got previous information on our system in regards to that case? Have we got a case on it already that we're already investigating? And the meat of it is then investigated further. And then if we haven't already registered a case, it becomes a registered case, and then we investigate.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. I do understand the process. I guess I'd just like to kind of echo Councillor Took's points as well, actually, just about the fact, you do an incredible job. It's a very challenging job, but it is so fundamental. I'm Vice Chair of South and West Planning Committee, and having spent several hours sat in the chair listening to and discussing roof heights, you know, the minutiae of details in relation to planning applications that the planning teams themselves spend an awful lot of time trying to get right. It is concerning to me in terms of maintaining support in the planning system as a whole. If then what happens is that there is a breach and then it just effectively gets waved through because potentially we don't have the tools or the mechanisms within our arsenal to address the issues, and it leaves some people in the process, I know, wondering why we have what is the purpose in spending all that time discussing planning applications in the first place if actually the end result is going to be no action and it's not a particularly desirable outcome, but we get what we've got because the builder decided to build it that way. But thank you very much for your answers.
Any other committee member? Yeah, Alex, go for it.
Alex Brenton, the Chitton Upton. I applaud what the enforcement officers do. I think they're sometimes quite brave. And I do wonder that in our code of everything, there's not an awful lot of talk about their health and well-being. We know that obviously they've got too large a case book, so they have to go out regularly and are meeting the public, and it's not always easy negotiating with people or even asking sometimes who's in charge of a building site. Do we have you got, I mean, in the past we haven't, but I wonder about their well-being do we give them a backup? Do they go out in teams of 2? Do we ever think about body-worn cameras when you're reporting, when you're accosting new cases? You never know what might happen. That's one question. It may not be in the past, but has it been taken on board for the future? The other bit is there's the problem with planning and enforcement is, should we say, the view in many parish councils is that it's pointless, nobody does anything. Now, we know they do, but this communication between parish and town councils is not particularly good. You report something in, you don't always get told that the case has been taken up or that the case has been closed and what the reason it was closed. Actually, it wasn't a breach. It was okay. They're putting in a retrospect, any sort of closure, because it's the knowledge that something happened and was reported back, which is then logged in a parish and town council minutes, which then means that the public can ask the parish and town council instead of having to set up another complaint. We've had many cases in my ward where there's been multiple complaints about the same issue, and it had already been dealt with, but the communication wasn't there. And that reflects on the reputation of the planning system and the enforcement system. So that's my question, is what's past is past, but has that been picked up in the scrutiny and put forward?
Thank you, Alex. I will call in Councillor Parsley. Sorry, I can't help it. In my head, you're always a councillor. I'll call in Matthew Pearls shortly. I just want to... I'll touch on your second part afterwards. I'll let Councillor Pearls talk about... I'm doing it again. I'll let Matthew Pearls talk about the safeguards put in place for our staff. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm still getting over that. Sorry, it's Matthew Prowse. I'm the Director of Planning. Can I answer the first part, if I may answer? Health and safety and my wellbeing of my teams is the most important thing that I do every day. We have loan policy working that we make sure that we check, and that's for all police services, frontline staff. So that's civil enforcement officers, that's planning enforcement teams. We are quite popular, as you can appreciate, in local communities. But their safety is the most important. They do have body cams. We are looking at to deploy further concerns. We do risk assessments. Jonathan is aware that we talk to the police if we're concerned about individuals as well. And that's the most important. The job they do at times can be risky. But we need to make sure that we bring back all of our staff safely. But just to pick up one of the points, there's lots of concerns raised about complaints and the planning system. As you can appreciate, I probably deal with more complaints or inquiries, as I call them, than most in the organisation. And the biggest problem we have in planning is that people don't like a decision that a committee has made. So actually, my plea today is actually we're all part of the planning system, both officers and members, across Dorset Council. And we need to communicate a bit better in the future of what we do to the public. So I've taken that point on board. I can't answer the second bit, but Anna may, but I think hopefully it's answered it.
Thank you, Matthew. Oh, Shane, you'd like to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the health and wellbeing of the team, when I sat where you're sat a while back, on the performance dashboard, there was, when this council started, the enforcement team was quite small, and there was showing on that performance dashboard that we had an issue within the team around sick leave. There was quite a bit of long-term sick leave, and that was, as Councillor Brenton, you're on the right track. It was around that stress levels, that mental health issue with officers that are dealing with an extremely difficult environment, with extremely difficult situations, which comes with a lot of issues with it. And what I would say, since Mr. Hobson's come in, he's taken it on board to actually address those issues with the team. The team is in a far better place than it was, and they are. I think that's proven by the performance that they're putting in now. So just give an assurance to the committee that in terms of the health and well-being of the officers within that team, it's in a much better place, which is down Mr. Hobson's work he's doing around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. I think that does help reassure us greatly. And it's good because obviously, again, going back to employer of choice. I want to draw this together now because I think there's a few things we're trying to get out of this because this is looking at the previous work, and going forward, we will be looking at the new enforcement plan's effectiveness in 9 months, a year's time. I think what has come out of it, though, is the communication being something that is a real kind of area we could look at. They've had an idea about perhaps not advertising, but sharing stories when you have enforced somewhere. So the public have that realisation that if you don't follow the planning, then there could be outcomes. The second one is for amendments to then have notification to local members. And I think going further from that, actually what would be useful is once a case has been opened, so not just started to look into, but once an enforcement case has been opened, notifying the local members that case has been opened would help a lot in building up the kind of reputation. So when people say, oh, nothing's being done for this, we can say, actually, there is a current investigation going on that. And I don't think that would be too strenuous as something that could be done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an important point. Back to the welfare side of things, I do regularly updates with my team, so everyone's happy in that fact. Now, the moving on about the, sorry, I've lost my track of thought now, but yes, once a case is opened, there can be a concern in regards to information we give. We can give information in regards that a case has been opened in certain areas, and I have mentioned, I think, in the past about quarterly reports that I'm looking at implementing at some point after all of this, when my local enforcement plan was taken over. So it's something for me to next look at, is the quarterly reports on how we are operating in various areas and providing councils in that area. But for the ward members, in the areas of the planning enforcement breaches or the complaints that are brought in, we would have to be mindful of the information we give, but we could give certain information. I'm sure there are weekly lists that we could look at for. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I think we'd have to take away the action to look into what we can provide. But yes, we can absolutely look at that and see what we can provide in terms of once a case is opened. Thank you.
All I'm looking for is literally an enforcement case has been opened on this particular thing. That's it. We don't need any specifics. We don't need to know the details. We need to be able to reassure the public that, yes, it is being looked at and it's already been reported. We don't need any personal information or anything like that. And we understand that occasionally that will mean that some cases have opened and found there's nothing wrong. But that's not a problem. The issue is to let it know that it's happening. Councillor Took.
Just a query or a request for confirmation. The enforcement register, we've got a timescale for an online version of the end of the, end of this year. Is that still on? Because it's not very far away. So I can see that when that is online, it'll be a great deal of use for local members and presumably parish councils as well, who will be able to look at this. That'll be a good step forward, as long as it happens. Thank you.
Yeah, so that work is being taken forward as part of our wider work to introduce a new online planning register, an updated online planning register to include the enforcement register. Yes, the latest update I've had is that's still on track to be in place at the end of this year. Thank you.
So tying it up, I think we're happy with most of it so far. Lindsay, are you happy with those kind of the outcomes, which are to look into the legality of being able to notify members on amendments and the same for cases being opened? As far as us being able to endorse the continued work, I don't think we can do that until we've seen the plan for it, because there needs to be a plan before we can endorse it, because there isn't one yet. But when you are coming forward with a plan to reduce the caseloads and to work through the backlog, we'll very happily scrutinise it and endorse it at that point. I think you've done very well assuring us that you're aware of the issues and you are working on them. And I understand that it takes time for that plan to be kind of drawn up. If everyone's content, I think we can probably draw a line under this here. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And next we will move on to item 8, a review of the big conversation, public engagement. So, Laura, you're going to be presenting this one, I believe. Yep. So we'll pass straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this report has come at the Chair's request to address 4 key questions on the big conversation, engagement, development and activity. I provided, as part of the report, detailed responses to each of the 4 questions in sections 1 to 5. I will just go through some brief highlights. So the purpose of the A Big Conversation engagement programme was to engage with residents on the Cabinet's proposed strategic priorities for the next 5 years, with a view to feedback being given to help shape the developing plan. So the aim of the Big Conversation was to engage with a wide cross-section of residents from different geographical areas of the county, across the county, different ages, gender, socioeconomic backgrounds, people from underserved groups, and people with protected characteristics, etc. The Big Conversation ran from the 24th of July through to the 15th of September, following a delay in the start due to a pre-election period for the general election. And it was planned to utilise a mix of known engagement techniques to attract responses from a cross-section of Dorset Council residents. The in-person events were one part of the engagement programme, of which there were 8 planned events for residents and 4 additional for town and parish councils. Residents were also invited to contribute to the Big Conversation, either online using our Dorset Citizen Space platform. Also, if they were unable to get online, there were paper copies available in libraries, or the library staff were also trained to support them in getting online with the dialogue feature from Citizen Space. Or if they were completely, they were not able to get into a library and also digitally excluded, they could also contribute via telephone to our customer service teams. The Communities and Partnership team also attended several in-person youth events to seek the views of our younger residents, primarily aged between 13 and 18. So each in-person event location was chosen to have an even geographical spread across the Dorset Council area with the aim to attract high footfall of passing residents. We tried to ensure there were no barriers to any of our residents attending the in-person events. For example, we intentionally did not attend any events which had an entry fee, for example, Dorset County Show, Marlborough Show, etc. The majority of events were held over weekends, to make it available for working people to attend, and we purposely sought 2 locations in the north of the Dorset Council area due to the rurality, and around an event in Weymouth, obviously another in Portland, due to the highest, because these areas have the highest indices of deprivation in the Dorset Council area, with further events in Bridport, Wareham and Wimborne. It's worth noting there were several geographical locations the team considered, but in the short time span weren't able to secure locations for various reasons. For example, the location contact, we didn't have a response from them, or there was no availability on those particular markets on the required times and dates within the timeline. So the total number of residents interactions across the whole engagement programme was approximately 780. And 4.4 details the breakdown of the attendees of the residents and the town and parish events. So we had approximately 123 online responses and a handful of paper copies from libraries or via customer services. We took the decision not to ask for demographic data from residents, as we really felt this would detract from the organic conversations that were had. We were very, very keen to get qualitative information from this engagement event. So we felt the engagement events were successful in terms of achieving the objectives. So we had a good level of attendance across most events from a wide cross-section of residents. We had good quantitative and qualitative feedback from attendees on the proposed council plan priorities, which is now being used to shape the council plan. Residents had multiple ways to access the big conversation, making engagement accessible to residents who wanted to contribute. Engagement was delivered within the required timescale. And as per the recommendations, we would very much welcome Scrutiny Committee's views and how we can improve and help shape future engagement programmes that the Dorset Council officers undertake. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor Hope would like to speak on this as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I just want to once again put on record my thanks to the members of staff who worked away from their normal hours, away from their normal environments to conduct the big conversation. It was gratefully received by members of the public in the areas it visited. And so I'd just like to once again take this opportunity to put my thanks on public record. I understand from the members' webinar and from other events I've attended with towns and parish councils, that there is an aspiration to look how we can improve our engagement. And I understand that not all areas of the big conversation went to plan. In particularly, some of the areas where we had lower numbers at the public engagement were severely affected by weather. For example, the one in Weymouth that I attended, the morning was very busy, good footfall. As soon as the rain came in at lunchtime, the last 3 hours was a complete washout. But that's nothing we can plan or ever do anything against. But as I said, Chair, and when you suggested that you wanted to bring this in for scrutiny, I welcome scrutiny. I welcome scrutiny on anything under my portfolio, because the aim of this is to look for those improvements. Members, you already have on record here from the webinar and from full council my commitment that future engagement activities will be carried out in different locations. Locations chosen here, some locations were new, some will repeat from the big sofa conversation carried out by the previous administration. So we will look to build on this. Some of the success stories and the higher engagement populations were where we attended events such as the Dorchester one. Already good footfall in that area because there was an event happening with a food festival. It may be that we attend more events like this in the future. Rather than running a series of engagement, we pick 6 or 7 throughout the year and just engage on a topic at each of those points. But I look forward to hearing the discussion here this evening during the scrutiny, and hopefully I can feed back later on.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Councillor O'Leary, I believe you were the first to indicate before we even called the item almost.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm always ahead of the game. I have a question to begin with. The question is, who had the final sign-off on where these took place? And then I'm going to be somewhat, not controversial, not hypocritical either. I've lost the words. So in regards to where the locations took place, I'm a Weymouth boy, born and bred. My ward is in Weymouth. Weymouth is, I was at the Weymouth engagement, and it was very, very good. We spoke to quite a few people. But it didn't actually take place in Weymouth in regards to the same way it took place in Portland or Wimborne or Bridport, because Weymouth is not a ward. Weymouth is a former district. And I was never a fan of LGR. I still am not a great believer in it. But if it has to work in regards to a way that not any areas are left out. I spent the last 5 years as a councillor. I passed from Rising Hope to Elder States with no intervening period. And of being the only Conservative in one of the only Conservatives in Weymouth, and somewhat many of us in Weymouth felt left out in the last 5 years due to representation on Cabinet. I think many of my colleagues in the East, in the North, and some in the West feel that same way now, that there's a high dominance of Cabinet within Weymouth and Portland and Dorchester. So therefore, if LGR is going to work and Dorset Council is going to work, then things like this have to be built into a part of a wider emphasis on sharing the load across the county. I believe, I heard that there was 2 up north. I was led to believe there was only 1, which took place in Shaftesbury, I believe it was, the deep north. But in regards to these things have to be spread out far more than they are. And also what I found quite insulting, despite being a Weymouth resident, a Weymouth boy and a Weymouth councillor, is one of the boards on there was, how much do you care about the economic regeneration of Weymouth? Well, if I lived in Verwood or Wimborne or wherever, I wouldn't really care that much. And if I was a resident of Ferndown, where there's a great deal of talk about economic development over the years, I've heard Councillor Lugg and Councillor Parks talk about it many times, I'd be quite annoyed when I hate to use the word, but banging on about economic regeneration in Ferndown, and the board only talks about economic regeneration in Weymouth. So I think we need, like I say, if we're going to work together as a council, we need to spread it out a lot more.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand your questions. Your questions were, who had the final say on there, and how was it? How did they make sure that it covered the whole of Dorset fair and proportionately? Yes, fantastic.
So I'll answer the first question. So Councillor Hope had the final sign-off, and that was presented to him by my team. The second question was how can we ensure that no areas are left out? I was around in LGR. I supported the large engagement event we did in the run-up to LGR back in 2018. The former county council did 29 engagement events at that time. We had about 30 members of staff working full-time on that, plus obviously support from our councillors. For this engagement event, we have 2 full-time members of staff as part of a wider communities team, and obviously a very short turnaround to enable the council plan to progress through the committee process. So it was very proportionate. I think I'd like to go back to in the report is that the in-person events are one section. We didn't expect to speak to every single resident within the Dorset Council area, but to give them an opportunity to have their say on on this engagement and on the proposed priorities of the council plan. Through lots of different methods. We, as a council, we were criticised previously for only doing online engagement, either through consultation and engagement. So it was important to us to have a mix of techniques that people are able to engage with us on. So the 8 selected residents was just a sample of that. We have got plans in the future for further engagement, and we would be going out to different areas of the Dorset Council. So hopefully that will answer those questions.
Fantastic, thank you. I have a queue of 3 other people waiting to speak. Did you want to come in as a point of clarification on that answer?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Just to confirm, the final sign-off was done by myself after involvement of other members. Both the leader and deputy leader were involved in the initial planning, and the recommendations from the original officers, some of them were changed. As Laura's mentioned, the Melplas show was one, and we said nowhere that's ticketed because we wanted it open and accessible to all. And just to respond to Councillor O'Leary also, I understand Weymouth is a town and not a ward, and obviously I would have been delighted to have it in Westham. And maybe next time we can look at having it in Littlemore in conjunction with one of the wonderful events that the Littlemore Community Group organise at the Top Club. So, you know, we will be in conversation with you for something like that in the future.
Whilst I will just remind people, I don't want to get back to it should have been in my ward, it shouldn't have been in my ward. That's not relevant for here. We're looking at the validity of the outcome that was received and the people that engaged with it. So in order so everyone knows where they are, I have Councillor Gibson, I have Councillor Bartlett, then I have Councillor Parry, then I have Councillor Craig. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Simon Gibson representing Verwood. Not to take exception at all with what you said in your statement there, but one of the things that I will want to touch on in my remarks and in my questions is actually once again on the locations that were chosen. As much as anything else, the reason I've come over from Verwood tonight is because of the strong feelings in my community that they've been to a point disenfranchised through this exercise. And I know that feeling is shared in towns like Gillingham and like Ferndown, significantly sized towns, bigger than several of the towns chosen as locations, which is a frustration. I don't want that to be the predominant feature of my comments, though. A lot of what was being attempted by the big conversation is good, it's laudable, and I think it was pointed in the right direction. I think the team were absolutely right in this mission statement set out in the report to try and diversify the range of ways that people could get involved in it. And I note in the main report, it talks about the lessons learned from previous communication efforts to try and make sure that we were doing it properly. The main question I've got, but I've got some questions I'll ask before that, is have we really achieved what we set out to achieve? Our own, the impact assessment, the 92-page impact assessment with it, talks about making sure that we've taken enough time to conduct our communications with the public and our engagements thoroughly. One of the recommendations from previous learnings was that we perhaps hadn't done that enough. So I'll leave that as an open question. Did we give this long enough? I understand the report sets out quite clearly that there was a time sensitivity to this. It wasn't helped by the calling of the general election, and we wanted it to be ready so that it fitted in with the cycle of the forthcoming council plan. That's fine, but if this is to have any significant impact upon it, it still needs to have been done properly. Again, have we achieved what we wanted to achieve? And it's clearly a very important piece of work when we do consider the council plan. We've got the webinar for that in the morning. Because actually the 192-page report for the big conversation wasn't attached to the minutes of this agenda, or to the reports of this agenda. It's attached to the papers for the agenda on the 29th, which is when we discuss the council plan. So you can see where there's a bit of an issue here, can't you, Chairman? Because in one hand, we're told that it's very, very central to this hugely important strategic piece of work. And at the same time, we're told that there wasn't necessarily enough time to do any more in it. 8 locations chosen. There's quite a lot of locations left out. And I wouldn't mind, apart from the fact that of the 700 or so, not accepting that's a minimum figure because you can't record everybody, but of the minimum number there, let's be generous, let's double it, say it's 1,400. That is about 0.3% of the Dorset public. The split between online and in person, because we're told online was the substitute if you couldn't go to it in person, if you were one of those areas where you didn't have a big conversation in your ward. 123-ish people online. That's not even 0.1%. So the question I've got, I'll come back to the main question, is have we achieved through this exercise enough? If we took the right approach, did we just simply not give it long enough? And can we really put any weight to what the big conversation says if the percentage of total respondees is so small? And then a slightly tongue-in-cheek last question is if 700-ish people is a big conversation, would the portfolio holder tell me what a small conversation is?
Sorry, I'm not giggling at your last comment at all. So I will pass over the majority of that. Absolutely, you would like to answer that one? Okay.
Thank you. Jen Lewis, I'm Head of Comms and Engagement at Dorset Council. So yeah, just to respond to some of that. So the first thing to say is this wasn't statutory consultation. This was informal engagement, and it builds on a lot of other things. So we do, every 2 years, we do a resident survey, which uses a weighted sample. It's a quantitative piece of research, and it tells us about what our residents think, about where they live, and about the work of the council. And that information has been used to help shape the new council plan. So we already had that really robust quantitative insight. Second of all is to mention the new council plan is based on the manifesto of the new administration. And in a way that's been through a whole public process because people voted, didn't they, in the local elections. So that's the basis for the council plan. So the big conversation was informal engagement to say, the council has these proposed priorities, and to go out to the public and ask for their views. Are they the right priorities? Are there things missing there that you want to see more of? And that's the feedback that we got. So picking up Councillor O'Leary's point about Weymouth regeneration, we got a really big response on that. And as a result, we're able to show in the council plan that there's a new emerging market and coastal town strategy that will pick up the regeneration needs of other areas. So I would say from that point of view, it was effective. We were listening to people and we're making changes as a result.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to come back in. I don't believe you answered any of the questions there. I understand what you were saying, talking around the subject, but there was a few questions there which Councillor Gibson asked about, did it go on for long enough? Do you consider this actually is a success? What numbers were you looking to gain for? Councillor Gibbs, if you want to reiterate that, it might help.
Thank you, Chairman. So I appreciate there was a lot of questions and a bit of a long-winded answer from me originally. Perhaps if I can go back a stage and ask a separate question first, which is, what is so important about the timescales for the preparation of the new council plan that we couldn't have extended this a bit longer to truly have done it justice? It seems like a sensible plan. It feels like a good engagement plan that just wasn't given long enough and didn't give enough people an opportunity to do it. Could we not have delayed things so that it could have had a more meaningful impact to it, rather than having to ultimately say it did what it could in the timescales, but we're going to have to fall back on the resident survey?
I believe that was a decision by the leader to make the December meeting. So that could have been different, but the leader decided that it had to make that meeting. That's correct? Okay. Because you had a few other points in that question. Anything else? Were you happy?
It's the other points I think I'd be more grateful. Then once that's answered, I have just a very, very small question about regeneration. So once the results of the big conversation were taken into account, it seems to me from the recommendations in the main report that's coming to review next week, is that ultimately all of the priorities remain the same. They got very high satisfaction levels from the public. People said, yes, I agree with that. I'm bound to say I did note with a smile one of the comments in the thing that said, well, of course I'd agree with them. They're very agreeable things. They're very open-ended. They are ultimately designed for you to agree with them. I'd actually be very interested to know why people disagreed with some of them, because they strike me as sort of home run things, ask an easy question, get an easy answer style questions. But the only thing it does seem to have removed from all of the original things it set out to ask was about regeneration. Why?
Laura, I'm going to Laura because your name's against the report. That's why I'm going to you first.
Sorry, can I just clarify the question as why regeneration? Why was that in the...
The question, Chairman, is every other priority has remained the same. The only one that's been removed from the recommendations was one of the three, economic growth. So if you look in the main report that's attached to next week's agenda, the 197, there's the four theme areas, and all of the ones that were there before are there still, minus one of the economic growth ones, which is where it's taken out the... Am I incorrect about that?
Sorry, I'm a bit reticent. That report wasn't part of this scrutiny. So I'm not going to push for an answer for that now, because actually we haven't got that as part of this whatsoever. That wasn't part of the report that was published to us. So I don't think it's fair because for them to be commenting on it now. So I do apologise, but I'm sure. What meeting is that going to next week? Is that...
Understood, Chairman, and thank you for that reminder. It goes to the joint committee of the two overview committees next Tuesday. Perhaps understood about not getting that answer tonight, but perhaps it just reiterates the point of we've got 192 pages about this and it's not attached to the report that we're scrutinising the big conversation on. Seems a bit odd.
So we aren't scrutinising the outcome of what the big conversation found. We're scrutinising the way it was set up, the lack of measurable targets for was it a success or not, and how it was run. That's what we're scrutinising here. The actual outcome from what they found at the events is going into the overview system and create a new policy. We are looking at how it was done and how it was run. So that's what we're going to stick to there. But thank you very much. Councillor Bartlett, you are next.
Thank you, Chairman. Time's moved on a bit. I just wanted to ask your indulgence and to give Councillor O'Leary assurance that Wimborne does care about Weymouth. As the Wimborne ward member, my wife and I regularly attend Weymouth. We absolutely love it. Love you, Louis. Fantastic town. And on a serious note, I think it was important to have that big conversation there. We all know the social mobility issues around Weymouth and the Portland area, and I think there's a view that we're going to have to look to Weymouth as driving Dorset economy. It's going to be extremely important going forward and part of that regeneration. And I absolutely applaud my cabinet colleague for taking that conversation on the road. Scrutiny as part of hindsight and looking at it as to how things could have been done. I think I would also agree with my cabinet colleague that the officers did a fantastic job. And I think it's something I think it's a comment. I think we need to do these types of engagements with the public on a regular basis. Too often that we find that the public think that we're remote and we don't listen to them. So that's my comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Appreciate that. Councillor Parry is next.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Andrew Parry, West Parley Ward. I know a number of my residents would have commented on this, that they rather thought they gave their opinion on how the council's priorities should be when they cast their vote in the local elections a few weeks earlier. And when we look at the results we've received today, the numbers we're looking at here, more votes were cast in my parish ward than you have gathered across the entire county. How are we going to base the outcomes of our council's priorities using such a small sample? The other question I would like to ask is, all these things come at a cost. There's no reference to what this cost in terms of officer time and travel and other arrangements. Could we have some indication of what those costs were like and how we would judge that to be value for money and whether we should repeat the exercise?
Thank you, and I'm going to really try to keep us very much on track here. So with those questions, the way I'm understanding it, we have one which I think is totally valid about the total cost of the whole exercise, very important. And the second one is about the numbers, the total number of engagement. And I think what we're looking for is a very simple, did this fall short, meet, or exceed your estimations for what you thought it was going to do? Is that okay? I want to keep it, yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Apologies, I didn't introduce myself last time I spoke. Councillor Ryan Hope, Cabinet Member for Community Engagement Culture, Customer Culture and Community Engagement. No, leisure is not in my title, Councillor O'Leary. Thank you. To reiterate, I think Councillor Parry picked it up precisely there. We based this big conversation on the Lib Dem manifesto that returned a Lib Dem council. What the engagement process was about was we committed as a new council, as a Lib Dem. No.
There were two specific questions. This is why I didn't want us to get into the validity of the outcomes or why they've done it. We are looking at the success and the actual running of this. That is a conversation for overview. This is about the two questions: the total cost, the number of engagements, did it fail to meet, or succeed? Those are the questions. We're trying to keep it away from political stuff. This is about the actual process that it went through.
So, Chair, as I was going to with the answer of that, to me, the process says when I stood on my election, I promised to engage with residents. The fact that we delivered on that makes it a success. We gave the whole population of Dorset the opportunity to respond. We couldn't force them to respond. And what we will be doing, there has been a wash-up, as I've mentioned on this, we'll be looking to improve this, to try and improve that engagement in future times. As for the cost, obviously that's not in the scope of the scrutiny questions that were delivered, but I'm sure it's an answer that we can get to Councillor Parry following this meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to push back though. So we're still looking for an answer on the question. Did it fail to meet expectations, or surpass expectations in terms of the number of the people that responded? It's just a case of trying to measure the validity of it.
I would have preferred more, openly and honestly, but as I said, we gave everyone the opportunity through various methods. We couldn't force them to respond.
Okay, thank you. I will move to Cabinet members shortly. I believe that was Craig is the last person to speak, and then we'll move to our own intake. Councillor Monks.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Monks, Bedminster Ward. I'll keep my question fairly short. The locations that were selected, by default, they're obviously larger population areas, towns. And coming from a rural ward, I kind of see the virtual map in my mind. There's a lot of rural areas that wasn't covered in the in-person element of this. I'm not going to kind of rehash a similar question that's already been asked, but I'll rephrase it to what do you think we can do in the future to make sure that rural communities are picked up, because people in my ward will have a very different view to Weymouth and Portland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Residents in the rural wards, where obviously it was in all the libraries, there was advertisements in all the libraries of those areas. In the future, we will be utilising our family hubs, our day centres a lot more as well. And we will be encouraging our councillors to share it more on their social media as well, for residents to respond online as well as in person.
Is it answering a question?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think the other thing, as I've already alluded to, we saw the success of the higher attendee ones was by attending events. So it could be future engagements. We look to attend some of the rural events, village fetes, where there's already a dense population of people turning up, so we can attract some of those higher footfalls and get into those communities.
Okay, so we're going to move into committee members now. There's a whole host of hands up. I spotted two here. I don't know who was first. Is there Councillor Took? Please go first.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it didn't happen in my ward either. And we're a small ward. But Dorset's a big county with lots of towns, lots of people. I was a little uncomfortable with Councillor Parry's implication that unless you get several thousand respondents, it's not worth doing, because I've never seen a consultation, apart from the local plan, I guess, that's ever had that many respondents. holding a big conversation is a way of finding out what people think. It was part of the election process that we were going to do this, and we did it. I think in terms of success, the success will be determined by how well we respond to what's been said and how well that response is then accepted by the people that we serve. And I think it's a little, if you just want to focus on the numbers, how many, it's very strange questions, isn't it? How was the success of the events defined? Well, I'm not sure it was defined. Success is getting as many people as possible to talk to and to do that as an ongoing basis. So I'm fairly sure, I don't know, but I would hope that this is the first of a series of events so that we can continually talk to the people who vote or don't for us. So I think my take on this is, yes, it was successful. There's possibly lessons we can learn to make it smoother, but that's how this process goes. So I think it was good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. I think Councillor Hope made a very good point earlier about would he have liked more people? Yes, we would like everyone endorse it to have responded. That is best case scenario. So I'm coming at this, I'm coming at looking at this similarly to the way we carried out the climate change big conversation, or whatever the term for it then, for an unofficial engagement and consultation. And with that, I think it was very much, for that, we got lower numbers. We did not get as many as we wanted. And so I was looking at judging on that, because whenever we run any events, you have that ballpark, what you're aiming for. And we definitely had ours, we were aiming for that, and it fell short of it. And that's how I was looking at measuring it for this. That was all it was, because obviously we want everyone to endorse it to respond. That would be the best case scenario. Councillor Rory.
Thank you, Chair. I sort of echo Councillor Took's comment. I think questions involving will you deem it a success, about or nearly a success, etc., they're irrelevant, because you could do 4 different locations and have even less people turn up to speak. You could have 4 different locations again and have 3 times as many people come up and speak to us. How do you score that matrix of did it meet requirements, etc., as you said earlier? I think it's just loose questions and they're not really contributing to the conversation about it.
We're here to scrutinise the way it was run and how it happened. And to do that, we have to be able to derive a level of success or not success from it. Otherwise, if you speak to one person, that's a success, because it's one more person than we had spoken to before. I think what we're looking at here is the metrics of success. That's part of it, I think. I don't quite understand, sorry.
No, that's fair enough. So what I'm saying is, if that's the case, we can't expect officers to come back with a question saying yes or no, it's a success or not. Where's the matrix to score that success?
Absolutely. KPIs, which are normally set out at the beginning of any endeavour. And that's what I assumed would have been done here, but obviously it wasn't, because it's on the paperwork that they aren't there. And I guess that's where it's slightly harder to scrutinise, and that's why we're trying to do it. We've heard some good numbers like 0.03% and things. Councillor Brenton.
Councillor Brenton, Litchett and Upton. No, there wasn't one in my ward, but I went to Wareham, which is just down the road from me, because just to see what was going on. And I have to admit, I was quite impressed. Admittedly, it was market day, so there was the natural sort of buzz. The officers were engaging with people. Me and 2 other local-ish councillors were dragging the public in, because half of them were friends or related. And once you got 2 people talking, lots of people talked. And it was talking. It was a conversation. So that, I have no problem with the numbers that came into us, and I thought it was well worth doing. What I have an issue with, and I'd like to ask questions about, is the town and parish events, where, as far as I can remember, and I didn't actually go back and check my minutes, parish and town councils were sent information that these events were going to happen and do come along, and then you'll know what's going on and all the rest of it. 3 of the councillors from my ward, from the town council came together. So that's 3 people, but it was only 1 town council represented, came and they reported that they were very disappointed. There just didn't appear to be anybody to answer a question. There was no great information going on. There was no buzz there. There was nothing that they could feed back to the town when they came back again. And if you look at I assume these are the numbers of people on section, 4.4, they were the numbers of people that came rather than the parishes that came. Now, bearing in mind that I know 3 came from 1 town council and they went to Dorchester, well, knock that off. So there's 20 others. I mean, this isn't 23 parish and town councils came to Dorchester, probably only 5, 6. Some of the local councillors came. That was not a very good, or it doesn't appear to be, a very good and effective way of passing the information to parish and town councils. And because they were definitely uninspired, there was no way they went back and sort of pushed it out. We put it on the Facebook page, but how many people actually read that? You need to have a buzz to make other people enjoy. And the other thing is that with the best will in the world, and I do have 2 libraries in my ward, both of whom had some leaflets. So in theory, they could have helped people to fill in the surveys. That's the idea. But they both said, in both libraries, when people asked, oh, what's all this about? And they said, oh, I'm supposed to help you fill this in, or I can show you. They were too busy doing library commitments, which is after all what they're paid for, to actually be able to be a useful disperser of information. And I'm lucky I've got 2 libraries. An awful lot of wards have no libraries. And an awful lot of people, an awful lot of wards do not have good public bus services or whatever to take them to a library or to the next market town. So I have a feeling that dispersing it out into the rurals takes much more than having an online copy and a few in libraries. I don't know how we do it. I would suspect a travelling roadshow. I was wondering, what happened to our mobile library machines, our buses? We used to have them until we put them somewhere in mothballs. That is how you get to villages. You go with balloons hanging out of the double-decker windows and you tell people that things are happening. And that is what I would... So the question is, what other ways have you considered using this big conversation, which is a good idea, to actually get to the rural areas?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brenton. So, yeah, we have acknowledged that the town and parish events didn't quite land as we had hoped. We did do a lot of communications via email with them and sent them out all the information about what would be expected of them during the events. Unfortunately, because they're so used to receiving presentations for us with all the detail, some of them were quite surprised that we were asking them to give us some of the detail. And actually, this was the top level themes, and actually the work beneath that hadn't actually yet done, and this big conversation was actually informing that. So we have taken that back as part of our lessons learnt. And we do. So some of them very much did engage once they once they were explained as to what they would do. Some of them chose not to or preferred to do it online. But we have taken that as some learning. And I also will feed back to our library service about the information that our customer service representatives in there about some of them were too busy to be able to support that. And I think Councillor Hope wants to come in a bit further as well, please.
Fantastic. So I have a couple of points. One I think has come out very strongly that without setting key expectations and goals, like the aims for this are all exceptionally what I would call fluffy. I mean, emotional aims of like almost like a mission statement of what we would really like to happen. And I think, have we met those? Well, it's very hard to quantify that. I think that's been made clear. I think in the future, I think for any kind of comms plans and engagement exercises, having actual structured KPIs would be really sensible. So actually our goal is to have 1,000 people respond. I think that would make it a lot easier to get to. I think part of the drawing up of it is that you're going to come back. So presumably there was a budget set for this. Even if we haven't got the total spend, I assume it was budgeted before we did it. Is that the case?
There was a very small budget allocation, but most of it was in our normal core budgets.
Thank you. So we are going to, I will call you in very shortly, yeah. We are going to call in, you are going to come back to us with the figure afterwards for staffing costs, because I think another way that a lot of places do judge success is on pounds per interaction. That's how you pay for it online. That's how a lot of advertising works. And that is what this is. It's advertising as well as consultation. And I think it has been, successful. We have had a number of responses, so that's really good. I know this is going to go forward to overview to be taken forward there. And I think the more political points would be better set there. And here is very much looking at, this time clearly there are some learning parts from it. I think maybe looking at how the town and parishes were involved is one of those learning points. KPIs is a learning point. Are there any others people would like to, they think we should put in there a note from this? I'm looking around. No? Councillor Bryan, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the situation that I have full support for Councillor Hope on this, because having tried to do a consultation on climate change, you get very frustrated when you don't get the results you were looking at. I went with a minimum amount of 4,000. We did get a couple of thousand responses, but it's still sad that we can't get the message across to the public that this is what we're trying to do for you. I think the fact that it came straight after the general election is also very sad, because I think most people were pretty miffed with politics at that stage. They'd had enough of it. And be careful what I say, but I think people probably weren't as enthusiastic as they should have been. The only point I would raise that I think, in hindsight, which is a lovely thing to have, we could have done differently. You chose 3 of the 4 town and parish councils. 3 of them you'd already had the consultation in those areas, or they were aligned at some stage. So Bridport had 2 events, Wimborne had 2 events, well done Shane, Dorchester had 2, the others had 1 each, and De Weston had 1 town and parish one. But I agree with what's been said. Let's learn from this, because we do need to have more consultation with the public if we're going to regain their support in helping us improve Dorset going forward. So, as I say, I understand your disappointment on the numbers. I'm not surprised, having experienced it, but that's where we are.
Would you like to come back on that, Councillor Hope? I thought you might.
Thank you very much. Just for a point of legality more than clarity, not consultation and engagement. Consultation has been mentioned several times in the Chamber, and I'm surprised I didn't do it more, but it is engagement, not consultation. I don't think I'm disappointed. I would have liked more, but I wouldn't say I was disappointed with the numbers, because the quality of conversation and the suggestions that came forward, as you know, you had the sticky dots, but then there was also the suggestion box underneath for post-its, how you could do things, and project ideas were really good, really, really good. So the quality of the response was really good. Just picking up on the locations for the town and parishes, we tried to pick central places to groups of town and parishes so that they could travel a short distance to go to their nearest hub, let's say, location for a pocket for each area of Dorset Council. That's why those town and parish locations were chosen as they were. Picking up on the town and parishes also, as Councillor Brenton said, of course, every town and parish is going to have a further say on our new strategy, our new plan, because that has been sent to all town and parishes for comment. So again, we are looking to engage with them more, involve them more, work with them more.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'll just leave this item finished on just one funny, amusing typo, which I did enjoy in there, which you might want to fix on page 50, where it says that our corporate plan aimed at responsive and customer focused. This works against it. And I think that's kind of funny because it clearly means the opposite. So I'll leave it on that. And thank you so much for coming in for a very thorough grilling there, if everyone's happy. Thank you. Next time, come with KPIs. So we'll go back to the agenda. I think we are getting towards the end of it now, and we will whiz through the last few items as it is 9 o'clock, and I do apologise these run late. The next item is item 9, the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. There's one item to be added to the November one, which is a review of the success of the parking charge reduction trial. It was on there already. For some reason, it was taken off. I'm not sure how. I spoke to to Matthew Piles, and he's agreed it'll go back on. I'll stop calling him councillor. I can't help it. I've spoken to Matthew Piles, and he's happy for it to go back on. So I'm not sure why it came off. Does anyone else have any comments on the forward plan, the work programme? Excellent. Then we have item 10, Executive Arrangements Forward Plan. Lindsay.
Only to say that the Cabinet Forward Plan and shareholder plans are on your agenda so that you can see the items that are going to Cabinet, and if there's anything that you want to identify for our post-decision scrutiny at an appropriate time in the future.
Thank you. So if anyone wants to raise anything on that now, but it's best to have those, any suggestions at any point, please email me, phone me, anything's appropriate for that. So we'll move to item 11, urgent items. There are none. Item 12, exempt business. There is none. That is the meeting closed. See you on the 15th. Thank you, everyone.